The voice on the other end of the phone was cold, a clinical detachment that sliced through the early morning quiet of the house. Move your things out before I get back. She deserves this home more than you ever did. The line went dead before Emily Carter could even draw breath to respond. She stood in the center of the living room, the silence after the call swelling to fill every corner, pressing against the windows, smothering the familiar hum of the refrigerator. To him, she was disposable, replaceable, a woman he believed he could erase from his own life, from the very walls of this house, with a single sentence. In the heavy quiet, her own soft breathing sounded unnaturally loud, and she realized with a distant shock that the faint, hiccuping sob she heard was her own. The memory of his voice bled into others, a cruel montage he'd curated over the past year. He had flaunted his replacement, not just in secret, but in the open, with a brazenness that was meant to wound. She'd heard the whispers, filtered through supposed friends who took a perverse pity on her. He called her pathetic behind her back, a millstone around his ambitious neck. He told his new circle, his upgraded acquaintances, that he was finally editing his life, cutting out the weak chapters. She, Emily, was the chapter he should have never written, a first draft full of errors he was now rectifying with a sleek, glossy sequel. But while he was sipping champagne on sun-drenched beaches with his mistress, laughing with his head thrown back in pictures she'd been unfollowed enough to avoid, but not blocked enough to never see, his wife was signing papers of her own. They were not receipts for designer swimwear or hotel suites. They were documents of a different sort, dense with legalese, heavy with finality. He had delivered his eviction notice from an airport terminal, the background noise a chaotic symphony of departure announcements and rolling luggage. "Move your things out before I get back. She deserves this home more than you ever did," he had said, his eyes already scanning the crowd for Vanessa, not even granting his wife of 8 years a second glance. To him, she had become furniture, outdated decor to be removed before the new occupant arrived. He had spent months preparing this moment, showcasing his new life online in a series of carefully filtered images, all while mocking her stability, her quietness, her love, which he now framed as desperation. He told everyone who would listen that he was upgrading his life, that she was the regrettable prologue to his real story. But while he was toasting his perceived freedom on distant shores, Emily was in a lawyer's office, her pen hovering over the dotted line of a sales agreement. The house, the one he was so casually gifting to another woman, was legally hers, bought with the last of her mother's inheritance, a fact he had conveniently rewritten in his own narrative. So when he returned 2 weeks later, tanned and arrogant, laughing with a carefree ease as he walked hand in hand with the woman he had replaced her with, he approached the familiar front door with the swagger of a conquering king returning to his castle. He inserted his key into the lock with a confident twist, already beginning a sentence to Vanessa about the terrible decor he'd tolerated. The key didn't turn. It jammed, refusing to catch. He jiggled it, frowned, and tried again, his smile faltering. And what happened next, in the slow-motion horror that unfolded on that porch, wiped the smile off both their faces. Sometimes the people you so carelessly throw away are the ones who quietly, methodically, rewrite the ending. And sometimes the home you are so sure you own, the foundation you built your arrogance upon, isn't yours anymore. Emily had learned the art of stillness, of constructing an inner fortress so impenetrable that his insults would glance off its walls. It was not that the words hurt less, they landed with the same sharp, familiar ache. But she had discovered that showing that pain, flinching, crying, arguing back, only fed him. It was the reaction he craved, the proof of his power. So when Mark's voice, sharp and impatient, floated up the stairs that morning, a morning that now felt like it belonged to another lifetime, asking why his shirts were never ironed correctly, she answered with a calm she did not feel. "I'll redo it. she said, her voice even, while her hands, hidden in the folds of the cotton shirt dress, trembled so violently she had to clutch the fabric to steady them. He always demanded crisp collars, knife-edge pleats. She had become an expert in starch and steam, yet somehow it was never enough. It was never him. Mark walked into the bedroom moments later, his presence immediately altering the atmosphere of the room. He carried his usual, unshakable confidence, a quality that seemed less earned and more performed, a costume he wore to convince the world, and perhaps himself, that he belonged to a wealthier, more important caste than he actually did. His suit jacket was slung over his shoulder with a studied casualness, as if he were perpetually on his way to or from a photo shoot. He surveyed the room, his gaze sweeping over her and the bed laden with laundry, as if assessing a slightly unsatisfactory staff. Emily, he sighed, the word heavy with exasperation. He picked up the freshly ironed white shirt, flicked the collar with a disdainful finger. You use too much starch again. It's practically cardboard. She kept her eyes on her task, folding another shirt with meticulous care. It's the same amount as last time, she said, her tone neutral, offering a fact, not a defense. Last time it was fine. Today it's wrong, he countered, his voice acquiring a dangerous edge. Do you see the problem? She nodded silently. That was always the safest response. Arguing was futile, it only amplified his voice, turned a criticism into a tirade, and she had long ago grown terrified of the neighbors hearing yet another fight through the charming but thin walls of their beautiful show home. The Carter house was impressive from the curb, a testament to aspirational living, but the neighborhood was closer knit and observant than Mark's ego liked to admit. His dream was a gated community, a literal wall between him and the ordinary, but his salary, though substantial, had never quite matched the grandeur of his self-image. She placed the offending shirt back on the ironing board. I'll redo it. He sighed again, a theatrical sound of immense burden. Please do. I can't show up to meetings looking like I live with someone who doesn't care. The words, intended to diminish, landed with their usual precision. But she didn't flinch. She waited until he had disappeared into the walk-in closet, a space dominated by his suits and her carefully organized, less impressive garments, before she allowed herself to release the breath she'd been holding, a long, slow exhale that did little to ease the tightness in her chest. 8 years. That was the length of the sentence she had served in this beautiful prison. In the beginning, Mark had been different, charming, fiercely driven, attentively romantic. He had made her feel chosen, seen. Somewhere along the way, perhaps with the promotion he'd chased so relentlessly, the ambition had curdled into arrogance. The new job had changed him, but the influence of his family had altered him more fundamentally. They were old money, or a convincing facsimile of it, with the condescension to match. Emily was not. She came from quiet, hard-working middle-class roots, a fact Mark never stated outright but never let her forget. He corrected her pronunciation of certain words at dinner parties, chuckled with faux affection when she failed to recognize a designer label, made her feel perpetually like a student in the grand university of his world. His sister, Lauren, was the most relentless professor. Lauren, with her perfectly highlighted hair and surgically sharp smiles, never missed an opportunity to remind Emily, in 1,000 subtle ways, that she had married far, far up. Emily had learned to swallow these comments whole, letting them settle like stones in her stomach until she barely felt their weight anymore. That particular morning, even before the shirt critique, Emily had sensed a shift in Mark's mood. He was distracted, vibrating with a low-grade excitement that had nothing to do with her. He checked his phone constantly, his thumb swiping over the screen, a faint, private smile playing on his lips, a smile she realized with a pang she hadn't been the cause of in years. A tiny, instinctual alarm bell rang in the depths of her chest, but she quickly silenced it. Experience had taught her that questioning him, showing curiosity about his life outside of her, was an invitation to coldness, to accusations of nagging or neediness. As he finished his meticulous grooming, he held forth about his upcoming business trip, painting himself as the indispensable linchpin of his company, the man who would single-handedly secure a game-changing deal. She nodded at the appropriate intervals, a skill she had honed to perfection, but one detail snagged in her mind. He hadn't named the client. He always named the client, usually with a boastful flourish about their importance or wealth. When he finally left for work, the house seeming to expand in relief at his absence, she sat on the edge of the unmade bed and stared up a shirt she had now ironed twice. Her reflection in the dresser mirror looked back at her, a woman with tired eyes. Not the tiredness of physical labor, but a deeper, more spiritual fatigue, as if her inner light had been slowly dimmed, watt by watt, over the years. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, a welcome intrusion. A text from Rachel, her closest, and, she was beginning to realize, only real friend. "Coffee later? You sound stressed." Emily's fingers flew over the screen. "Yes, please." She needed an hour, just 1 hour, with someone who listened without judgment, who asked questions because they cared about the answers, not because they were looking for ammunition. She met Rachel at a small independent cafe tucked between a dry cleaner and a grocery store. The air was rich with the scent of ground espresso and cinnamon, a comforting, ordinary smell that felt like an antidote to the sterile perfection of her own home. "You look tense," Rachel said gently, stirring a dollop of honey into her tea. "Bad morning, same as always," Emily replied, attempting a smile that felt brittle on her face. "He didn't like how I ironed his shirt." Rachel groaned, rolling her eyes skyward. "Are you kidding me? Again?" Emily simply shrugged, a small, helpless movement. "It wasn't worth arguing about." Rachel leaned forward, her expression turning serious. Everything with him turns into not worth arguing about. Why does he get to decide what's worth it?" Emily didn't have an answer because the truth was too humiliating to voice. She had spent years meticulously reshaping herself around the contours of his temper, sanding down her own edges to avoid friction, until she was no longer sure what her original shape had been. Before she could steer the conversation to safer waters, her phone buzzed again on the table. Mark's name flashed on the screen. She braced. The message was terse. "Need the blue suit pressed today. Important meeting tomorrow. Don't forget this time." She placed the phone face down on the table with a quiet finality. Rachel watched her, a worried crease between her brows. "You okay?" Emily nodded, but the smile she offered was thin and transparent. "Let's talk about something else," she said. And they did. They spoke of Rachel's work, of a new recipe for lemon tart, of a movie they both wanted to see. For 20 minutes, it almost felt normal, almost like the life of a woman unburdened by silent wars. But reality, in the form of Mark's expectations, came crashing back when Emily checked the time. She needed to be home, to finish the laundry, to have the blue suit ready, to ensure the house was in the state of impeccable order he demanded upon his return. She hugged Rachel goodbye, the familiar scent of her friend's perfume a fleeting comfort, and walked towards her car in the cafe's small parking lot. As she reached for the door handle, a voice drifted from behind the building, carried on a stray breeze. It was a familiar voice, Mark's voice, but its tone was unfamiliar, loud, boastful, laced with a cruelty that stopped her cold. She was not an eavesdropper by nature. Privacy was a principle she clung fiercely to, having had so little of it herself. But something in his tone, a gleeful malice, rooted her to the spot. "Man, she's lucky I kept her around this long," he was saying, followed by a laugh that was not his charming public laugh, but a coarse, ugly sound. Emily's heart began a frantic, painful pounding against her ribs. "You know how it is," Mark continued, oblivious. "Some women you keep around because they're useful, good for cooking, cleaning, keeping up appearances. Emily's fine, I guess, for that. But I'm done pretending she fits into my world. I need a partner who actually elevates me, not one I have to constantly explain things to." Another laugh echoed from the phone, a male companion in his disdain. "Exactly," he said, the word dripping with smug satisfaction. "Upgrade season." Upgrade season. The words hit her with physical force. He was talking about her as if she were a smartphone model, a car, a subscription service, something functional but outdated, to be traded in for the latest, shinier version.
She didn't cry, she didn't gasp or lean against the car for support. A profound stillness descended upon her. She just stood there, the California sun warm on her skin, feeling something vital inside her fracture, and then go very, very quiet. It was the silence of something dying.
Mark ended the call a moment later, still unaware of her presence just around the corner. She heard his footsteps, light and buoyant, as he walked to his own car. He was humming, a tuneless, cheerful sound, as if he hadn't just meticulously dismantled his wife's worth with a few careless sentences. Emily slid into her driver's seat with robotic precision. She stared at the steering wheel, her hands resting in her lap. She felt a vast, screaming void open up inside her, an urge to wail that was so immense it locked in her throat. Instead, she started the car, backed out of the space, and drove home slowly, carefully, as if she were transporting something infinitely fragile and already cracked. That evening, Mark returned home in a conspicuously cheerful mood. He complained about traffic with theatrical exasperation, bragged about a meeting where he claimed to have been brilliant, and ordered her to make reservations at an impossibly exclusive restaurant, a place he wanted to be seen. Emily moved through the motions, nodding, fetching his drink, but his words from the parking lot played on a loop in her mind. Useful. Upgrade season. She waited for a lull, a moment that felt safe, though she knew no moment truly was. "This trip you're taking," she began, keeping her voice deliberately light. "What exactly is it for?" Mark looked up from his phone, his gaze sharp and assessing. "Why?" I wanted to know which client you'll be meeting. I like to picture it," she offered, a pathetic attempt at connection. He smirked, a cold, little twist of his lips. "Why? Worried I won't behave?" Her stomach twisted into a hard knot. "No, I just asked." "Well, don't," his tone dropped, becoming flat and dismissive. "If I wanted you involved, I'd invite you." The conversation was over. She had been put back in her place. The next day, Lauren arrived unannounced, letting herself in with a spare key she wielded with a sense of ownership. She never knocked. She swept in as if auditing a property she managed. Her eyes performed a rapid, critical scan of Emily's simple blouse and jeans, her expression settling into something between pity and contempt. "You're still dressing like that, Emily?" she asked, her voice sugary with false concern. "Mark's trip. There will be real money there, important people." Emily kept her voice steady, a feat of immense will. "I'm not going." Lauren waved a manicured hand as if swatting away a gnat. "Obviously, Mark needs someone beside him who matches his social level. You stand out." The comment was a deliberate barb, not even thinly veiled. It was meant to draw blood. Emily held her breath, forcing the air to stay in her lungs. "He said it was work, not social." Lauren laughed, a light tinkling sound that set Emily's teeth on edge. "Sweetheart, everything is social, especially at this level." Mark chose that moment to enter the room, adjusting an expensive cufflink. "Talking about the trip?" he asked, though he'd undoubtedly heard every word. Lauren grinned at him, a conspiratorial flash of white teeth. "I was just telling Emily it's better she stays home. She'd just embarrass you around the big investors." The words were a scalpel, expertly wielded. Emily felt them slice deep, but she kept her face a placid mask, a skill learned from years in the trenches. Mark didn't defend her. He didn't even blink. Instead, he nodded, his gaze meeting his sister's in perfect understanding. "Exactly." Emily turned and walked to the kitchen, needing distance, needing the solidity of the granite countertop under her palms. She stood at the sink, staring out at the impeccably landscaped backyard, and let the cold stones steady her shaking hands. She didn't want this life to hurt as much as it did. She didn't want to feel like she was perpetually losing a battle she had never agreed to fight. Later that night, in the deceptive quiet of their bedroom, she sat on the edge of the bed while Mark packed.
He tossed expensive leather shoes and designer shirts into a suitcase with careless abundance. He didn't ask if she wanted to join him. The pretense of a work obligation had been completely discarded. "Mark," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "are you sure I shouldn't go?" He didn't look up from folding a sweater. "Positive, this trip is not your scene." She hesitated, then ventured into dangerous territory again. "Who will you be meeting?" He zipped the suitcase shut with a definitive rasp and straightened to his full height, looking down at her. "I don't owe you a schedule, Emily. Just handle things here." The finality in his voice was absolute. Her chest tightened, a familiar constriction, but she didn't push. She simply nodded, the obedient wife. The morning of his departure, she noticed the discrepancies, the clues she had been willfully ignoring. He wasn't wearing his usual clean, citrus-based cologne. He was wearing the one he reserved for very special occasions, a dark, spicy scent she had bought him for their 5th anniversary. He had shaved with unusual care, leaving no trace of stubble. He checked his phone constantly, his face lighting up with each new notification. And then she saw them, the printed plane tickets left carelessly on the kitchen table next to his keys. Not a printout for a flight to a conference hub like Chicago or New York, but a glossy, branded itinerary for a direct flight to a luxurious beach resort in Cabo San Lucas. And there were 2 tickets. The second ticket did not bear the name Emily Carter. It read Vanessa Hales. Her hands began to shake as she picked up the papers. Vanessa. The name was a ghost that had haunted the edges of her marriage for over a year. Mark's friend, the one who texted at odd hours, the one he described as just networking, the one Lauren followed and raved about on social media, a social media world Emily had been subtly edged out of. The truth, now physical and undeniable in her hands, slammed into her with such force she had to sit down, the chair scraping loudly in the silent kitchen. With a calm that felt alien, she folded the tickets neatly, walked upstairs, and placed them on top of his packed suitcase. She said nothing. When he came downstairs, suitcase in hand, he didn't glance at her face, didn't check for signs of distress. Her feelings were irrelevant. "Let's go," he said, checking his watch. "I don't want to miss the flight." She drove him to the airport because it was expected, because he enjoyed the performance of being dropped curbside like a VIP, a man too important for long-term parking. Outside the bustling terminal, he grabbed his luggage from the trunk and turned to her. His expression was not a farewell, but of cold administrative finality. "Move your things out before I get back," he said, the words delivered as a simple directive. "She deserves this home more than you ever did." He didn't wait for a response, didn't look back to see if she was still standing there. He simply turned and walked into the crowd, toward the woman waiting for him inside, swapping one life for another without a moment's hesitation.
Emily didn't stay to watch him disappear. The numbness that had protected her now gave way to a cold, clear focus. She drove home in absolute silence, her grip on the steering wheel so tight her knuckles stood out, white and aching. Her world wasn't just ending, it was being demolished. But in the rubble of that demolition, something new was forming. Not hot rage, not paralyzing fear, but something colder, sharper, more determined, a resolve. By the time she pulled into the empty driveway, the plan, nebulous and desperate, had crystallized. She would not break down, not this time. She walked inside, the house feeling eerily large and empty, and made a call she had never imagined making. Her voice was surprisingly steady when the lawyer's receptionist answered. "Hi," she said. "This is Emily Carter. I need to speak with someone about something important. It's unrelated to my husband's affairs, but I need discretion." The lawyer, a kind-eyed man named Mr. Jenkins, could see her that afternoon. Emily dressed carefully in a simple professional dress, tied her hair back, and drove to his office. She didn't rehearse. The words were there, lined up inside her with a calm she didn't feel. The meeting lasted an hour. She spoke carefully, outlining not the emotional betrayal, but the financial and legal facts.
The house was in her name, purchased with her inheritance. Her husband had ordered her to leave, effectively abandoning the marital home. She wanted to sell it, quickly and quietly. Mr. Jenkins listened, his expression growing increasingly grave as he took notes. Papers were drawn up, options laid out. The house, given the market, would sell fast. A preemptive offer might even be possible. When she left the office, she didn't cry with relief or smile with triumph. She simply felt awake, as if emerging from a long, drugged sleep. She drove home, the folder containing the listing agreement and sales documents resting on the passenger seat like a sleeping animal. At the kitchen table, she unfolded the papers. Her hand hovered over the signature line. This wasn't about revenge, she told herself. This was survival. The house was the last asset he couldn't touch without her consent, the final piece of a life he was trying to erase. She would not let him have it. She picked up the pen, a sleek silver instrument, and signed her name with a firm, clear hand. At that exact moment, somewhere over the Gulf of California, Mark was likely raising a glass of champagne to Vanessa, toasting the future he believed he completely controlled. When Emily finished signing, Mr. Jenkins slid the documents back into a neat stack and tapped the edges twice on his desk, a soft, final sound. "I'll process everything immediately," he said. "In fact, I have a potential buyer who has been looking for a property exactly like yours. They're motivated and can wire an earnest deposit today. If we move fast, the sale could be legally binding before your husband returns." Emily nodded, though a wave of dizziness passed over her. "So it's done?" "It will be," he confirmed, "and it will be binding, unless you decide otherwise. Not your husband, you." That distinction, that tiny morsel of sole agency, mattered more than she could have imagined. For nearly a decade, decisions had been made around her, for her, despite her. Now she had made one that was irrevocably, solely hers. The lawyer hesitated as she stood to leave. "Are you sure you're okay, Emily?" She didn't trust her voice, so she offered a small, steady nod. He didn't push. Instead, he handed her a set of temporary keys. "The buyer has requested you keep these until the closing, for access." They were plain metal keys stamped with numbers. Holding them felt strangely significant, like holding the skeleton key to her own prison cell. Stepping out of the cool, conditioned air of the office building, the late afternoon sun felt like a physical assault, warm and blinding. She blinked, feeling strangely exposed, as if her decision were written across her forehead for the world to see. The world, however, was oblivious. Cars passed, people hurried about their lives, and the city hummed with its normal rhythm. Her phone buzzed in her purse. A message from Mark. "Won't have service for a bit. Handle things." No thank you. Not even her name. Just another transaction, another order from management. She stared at the text, then locked her phone and placed it decisively in her purse. On the drive home, the city blurred past her windows. Her thoughts were no longer chaotic, but focused, linear. Mark had told her to move her things out. He expected to return to a cleared stage ready for his new leading lady. He never considered that she might rewrite the play entirely. Pulling onto her street, she slowed the car. The house stood as it always had, a picture of suburban success with its white trim, wide porch, and the hanging swing Mark had promised to fix for 3 summers. Nothing about its exterior betrayed the seismic shift that had just occurred within its walls, and within her. She parked and sat for a long moment, staring at the front door. She could see the ghost of the last 8 years superimposed on it, the hopeful young couple moving in, the tense holidays, the quiet dinners that grew quieter, the arguments muffled behind closed doors. Her past was in that house. Her future was in the signed papers in her bag. Finally, she stepped out. The porch steps creaked under her weight, a familiar sound she no longer winced at. Soon it wouldn't be her concern. Inside, the air felt still, waiting. She placed the folder and the new keys on the dining table, a symbolic transfer of power. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Lauren. "Mark says you're still moping. Don't make things hard. Move your stuff. He'll handle the rest." Emily let the message sit unread on her lock screen. There was a time she would have crafted a polite, appeasing reply. That time was gone. She walked a slow circuit through the downstairs, her fingers trailing over the back of the couch, the spines of books they never read, the cool glass of a photo frame. She wasn't grieving the house, she was acknowledging it, saying a quiet, internal goodbye, but not in the way Mark intended. He believed he was the author, writing her final chapter. He didn't know she had already started a new book entirely. The doorbell rang, a sharp, unexpected sound. She wasn't expecting anyone. When she opened the door, no one was there. Only an envelope identical to the lawyer's lay on the welcome mat. She picked it up, her heart skipping a beat. Inside was a single line on crisp stationery. Deposit received, sale confirmed. You made the right choice. Possession begins upon his return. She read it twice, her breath catching. The buyer knew about Mark's return date. She had never provided those details to Mr. Jenkins. A shiver, equal parts fear and something else, anticipation, ran down her spine. She folded the note, tucked it into her purse with the keys, and closed the front door. The lock clicked with a definitive, satisfying sound. She looked down at the keys in her hand. "He told me to leave," she whispered to the quiet hallway. "So I'm making sure he has nothing to come home to." And for the first time in years, a genuine, unforced smile, small but real, touched her lips.
The calm she had forged in the lawyer's office was shattered the next morning by the incessant, aggressive buzzing of her phone. Mark was posting. Not just one post, but a cascade of them, a digital parade of his new life that he knew, somehow, she would see. The first photo filled her screen. Mark, lounging on a plush beach chair, sunglasses reflecting the ocean, holding a garish cocktail adorned with a sparkler. Vanessa was tucked into his side, her head on his shoulder, her smile wide and possessive. The caption was a single, vicious phrase: "Upgrade complete." Emily's stomach turned, but she kept scrolling. Another photo, Vanessa kissing his cheek. The caption: "Some women know how to appreciate a real man." The comments were a chorus of validation from his new circle. Laughing emojis, "You deserve better," "Finally leveled up." Then a comment from Lauren: "Told you she'd melt down when she sees this." Emily set the phone down as if it were venomous. She didn't cry. The tears had been burned away by a colder fire. She made coffee, focusing on the mundane ritual to ground herself. The peace was shattered by a furious pounding on the front door. Lauren stood on the porch, phone in hand, face a mask of dramatic outrage. She barged past Emily without invitation. "What did you do?" she demanded, spinning around in the living room. Emily blinked. "Excuse me?" "Don't act innocent," Lauren spat, shoving her phone forward. "Mark is furious. You're making things harder for him." "I haven't spoken to him," Emily said flatly. "Exactly," Lauren snapped. "You're supposed to be gone. He told you to move out, and clearly you're still here, clinging, ruining his freedom." Emily crossed her arms. "I'm not ruining anything. He's on vacation." Lauren's eyes narrowed. "It's not a vacation. It's a transition. And you being here is holding him back. He doesn't want to come back to this burden." The word, spoken with such casual cruelty, landed like a blow. "This is still my house," Emily said, her voice low. Lauren scoffed. "For now." The two words hung in the air, a threat and a promise. Emily held her gaze, wondering how much Lauren truly knew. Did she have any inkling of the signed papers, the transferred funds, the new keys? Probably not. Lauren's arrogance was a blindfold. "I'll move when I'm ready," Emily stated. "No," Lauren said, stepping closer, invading her space. "You'll move when Mark wants you to." Something in Emily solidified, a core of steel that had been tempered in silence. She shook her head. "Not anymore." Lauren's confidence faltered just for a second. The simple act of refusal from Emily was so unexpected it was disorienting. Lauren recovered with a roll of her eyes. "This attitude is exactly why he left." She stormed out, slamming the door behind her with a final warning. "When he gets back, you won't like how this ends." The confrontation left Emily shaken, but not defeated. It was a skirmish she had expected. Her phone buzzed again. Rachel.
Hey, I saw the posts. Are you okay? Emily's throat tightened at the genuine concern. I'm fine, she lied. Listen, Rachel said, her voice tense. I need to tell you something, and you're going to be mad. A cold dread pooled in Emily's stomach. What is it? A long sigh traveled through the line. I knew about Vanessa. For a while. The world seemed to tilt. How long? Months, Rachel admitted, her voice small. I saw them together once, then I saw messages on his phone when you left it at my house. I didn't know how to tell you. I thought I was protecting you. The betrayal from her best friend was a different kind of wound, deep and quietly hemorrhaging. You should have told me, Emily whispered. I know, Rachel said, her voice cracking. I'm so sorry, Em. I messed up. The apology was real, but the damage was done. Another pillar of her life had proven unstable. I need some time, Emily said, and hung up before the tears could come. Alone, she turned to the one thing she could still control: information. She opened her laptop and logged into their joint bank account, a task she usually avoided, leaving the finances to Mark. The balance made her breath catch. It was catastrophically low. Scrolling through the transaction history was a descent into a second financial betrayal. Charges for five-star restaurants in the city, luxury boutiques, boutique hotel bookings, spa weekends, all within the last year, all coinciding with Vanessa's appearance in their lives. He had been systematically draining their shared savings, funding his double life while she dutifully budgeted for groceries and household expenses. The sickness she felt was profound. He hadn't just planned to replace her, he had planned to impoverish her, to leave her with nothing. She closed the laptop, the truth settling over her like a lead weight. The sale house was no longer just an act of survival or defiance, it was a necessary reclamation of the one asset he hadn't yet managed to steal. Her phone buzzed again with a new message from an unknown number. We need to schedule the inspection sooner than expected. The buyer. Her heart hammered. When? She typed back. The reply was instantaneous. Tomorrow, early morning, and one condition: no one else can be present. Not friends, not family. The specificity was chilling. It felt less like a request and more like an instruction from someone who understood the dangerous dynamics at play. Understood, she replied. The next morning, she cleaned obsessively, waiting for the inspector. At 8:15, a message. Arriving shortly. But no car appeared. After 15 minutes of tense waiting, a soft knock came at the door. She opened it to an empty porch. Another envelope lay on the mat. Inside, a single line. I prefer discretion. The inspection is complete. Bewildered, she scanned the untouched house. Her phone rang, the unknown number. Emily Carter, a calm male voice said. The sale is finalized. I'll take possession the day your husband returns. The line went dead. He knew. He knew when Mark was coming back. A cold realization dawned. The buyer wasn't just a random party. He was involved, and he was watching. The following days were a blur of packing and silent dread. A final, crushing blow came from her workplace, a sudden termination, couched in the language of restructuring, but delivered with a nervousness that suggested outside pressure. Lauren's handiwork, no doubt, tightening the screws. Even Rachel's attempt to help felt tainted by her earlier silence, her advice to just leave and avoid the fight ringing as a lack of faith. Emily felt utterly alone, but the isolation was forging a terrible clarity. The morning Mark was due back, she woke in a cold panic. Her text was a command. Landing early, be home before noon, be gone before I get there. She had 6 hours. As she rushed to pack the last of her belongings, she found it, tucked in the back of the old wooden desk drawer, an envelope she didn't recognize, thick and sealed, with Emily's name written in Mark's handwriting, but the slant was odd, unnatural. Inside was a copy of the house deed, but it was wrong. This deed listed Mark Carter as the sole owner. Her name was absent. The date was 7 months prior. The spouse signature line bore a crude forgery of Emily's name. The air left her lungs. 7 months ago, during the refinancing he insisted she needn't worry about, he had fraudulently removed her from the deed. He had been planning this theft for far longer than she'd imagined. She sank to the floor, the forged paper trembling in her hands.
She hadn't just sold a house, she had sold a piece of his crime. Her phone buzzed. The unknown number. Everything you found is real. Don't run. Don't give in. Hold your ground. A second message. Because Mark has been hiding things from you for a long time, and this is only the beginning. Before she could process this, the sound of a car engine cut through the morning quiet. She rushed to the window. A black sedan was turning onto their street. Mark was home. Early. Heart slamming against her ribs, she scrambled, shoving the forged deed into her purse. A final message flashed on her phone. Don't open the door. But it was too late. Heavy footsteps crunched on the walkway. Emily, open up! Mark's voice, booming and entitled, shook the front door. She pressed her back against the wall, paralyzed. Vanessa's voice, bright and annoyed, chimed in from the porch. Maybe she finally got the hint. Mark jiggled the handle. Why is this locked? You never lock this. Then came the metallic scrape of his key in the lock. A twist. A harder twist. A rattle. Nothing. What the? He muttered. Vanessa laughed coldly. Did she seriously change the locks on you? Shut up, Mark snapped. He slammed his palm against the wood. Emily, open this damn door. Emily's breath came in short, sharp gasps. Clutching her purse, she realized the truth had to come out. Now. Another message. Now, Emily. Tell him he doesn't live there anymore. She inhaled, steeling herself, and walked to the door. She turned the deadbolt and pulled it open. Mark stood there, hand raised mid-pound, frozen. Confusion, then outrage, washed over his face. What did you do to my... he started. Why didn't my key work? Emily met his gaze, her voice quiet but clear. Because it's not your door anymore. He blinked, then scoffed, trying to shoulder past her. She stood firm in the doorway. Mark, she said, the steadiness in her voice surprising even her. This isn't your house. His face contorted. Excuse me? You don't own this place. Not anymore. Vanessa pushed forward, arms crossed. Can you just let him in? This is ridiculous. No, Emily said, not looking at her. Mark's jaw clenched. Emily, move now. I can't, and it wouldn't matter if I did because your key will never work here again. She reached into her purse and pulled out the stack of papers, the sales agreement, the transfer documents. She held them like a shield. Mark, she said, her voice gaining strength, I sold the house. The porch went utterly silent. Mark's face emptied of color, then flooded with a violent, purpling rage. You what? You can't sell my house? You told me to move out, Emily stated, her voice sharpening, so I made sure you'd have nothing to come home to. You can't do this, he roared. Emily lifted the forged deed. Your house? You forged my signature to make it yours, but you didn't count on the sale exposing what you did. Vanessa took a step back, her eyes widening. Wait, what is she talking about? Mark ignored her, sputtering at Emily. You have no proof. None of that will hold up. You want proof? A new voice called out, calm and authoritative. Mark spun around. A man in a dark coat stood at the foot of the walkway. His presence commanded immediate attention. Mark paled. Daniel, he breathed, the name a shocked exhale. What the hell are you doing here? Daniel Brooks, Mark's former mentor, a man of immense respect and unassailable integrity in their professional world, took a few steps closer. You were always predictable, Mark. Vanessa whispered, Who is this? But the answer was written in Mark's horrified expression. Daniel was the one man whose opinion could destroy him. Emily watched, a strange detachment settling over her. Daniel nodded towards her. It's all documented, Mark. Forgery, identity theft, financial fraud. It will hold up very well, actually. Mark's bravado shattered. He turned back to Emily, desperation creeping into his eyes. Emily, you can't do this, please. I didn't want to, she said honestly. The years of pain gave her words weight.
I loved you once. I tried to save us, but you never wanted us, you wanted control. Then she handed Daniel the final piece, the handwritten confession from their brief, disastrous stint in counseling, where Mark had admitted to the cheating and his contempt, a document he thought she'd destroyed. Daniel read it, nodded. This seals it. He addressed Mark formally. You are legally barred from this property. The sale is complete. My attorneys will be in touch regarding the investigation into the fraud. Vanessa needed no further convincing. I'm not ruining my life for you, she said to Mark, her voice icy. She turned and walked briskly down the path towards a car idling at the curb. Lauren's car. Without a backward glance, she got in and Lauren drove them both away, abandoning Mark on the porch. He stood there, utterly alone, his world collapsing in real time. He looked from Daniel's impassive face to Emily's resolved one, a broken man finally facing the consequences he'd always evaded. This was my home, he whispered, the words hollow. Emily didn't look away. Not anymore. Daniel waited until Mark, moving like a sleepwalker, got into his car and drove off, the engine sound fading into the normal noises of the neighborhood. Then he turned to Emily. You handled that with more strength than most people I know. She let out a shuddering breath. I didn't feel strong. Strength doesn't mean not being scared. It means doing it anyway, he said gently. He handed her the final sales statement. Your share will be transferred by the end of the day. Use it to start fresh. Thank you, she said, her voice thick. Don't thank me, he replied. Thank yourself. You made the call, you signed the papers, you chose to walk out of the fire. With a final, respectful nod, he left. Emily stood alone on the porch of the house that was no longer hers, the temporary keys cool in her hand. She looked back inside one last time, not with sorrow, but with a profound sense of closure. People mistake quiet for weakness. They mistake gentleness for breakability. They assume the discarded will simply fade away, but they never see the resolve hardening in the silence, the storm gathering behind calm eyes. She stepped inside, walked through the empty, sunlit rooms, and opened the back door. A fresh breeze swept through, carrying away the stale air, the dust, the memories. She smiled, a small, real, weary smile. Then she whispered the truth she had earned, the lesson written in the ashes of her old life. Sometimes the home you thought you owned was never yours to begin with. And sometimes the woman you threw away is the one who rewrites the ending. She closed the door behind her, the click of the lock a final, peaceful period at the end of a long and painful sentence.
The afternoon sun was warm on her shoulders as she closed the front door of the house for the last time. The sound of the latch clicking into place was softer than she'd expected, a quiet, final punctuation mark. There was no fanfare, no dramatic swell of music, just the gentle rustle of leaves in the old oak tree by the driveway and the distant hum of a lawnmower a few streets over. She stood on the porch, the new, temporary keys to a life that was no longer hers dangling from her fingers. She dropped them into the small, pre-addressed envelope Mr. Jenkins had provided, sealed it, and slipped it into the mailbox, raising the red flag with a sense of profound finality. Her car, now packed with the distilled remnants of 8 years, felt both impossibly heavy and curiously light. She didn't look back as she pulled away from the curb. The house receded in her rearview mirror, not as a place of loss, but as a landmark she had finally passed. She drove without a clear destination for a while, just navigating familiar streets, allowing the rhythm of the road to soothe her frayed nerves. The initial surge of adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation was ebbing, leaving behind a deep, bone-aching fatigue. But beneath that, like a steady pulse, was a new sensation, a vast, open quiet. The constant low-grade anxiety that had been her companion for years, the fear of a critical word, a slammed door, a disappointed sigh, was gone. In its place was a hollowed-out space, ready to be filled with something of her own choosing.
She found herself at a small, extended stay hotel on the other side of town, a clean, anonymous place with neutral colors and free Wi-Fi. It was a temporary cocoon, a place to breathe and think without the ghosts of the past whispering from every corner. The room was small, but it was hers alone. She unpacked only the essentials: her clothes, her mother's jewelry box, the folder containing her copies of the sale documents, and the damning forged deed. She placed the folder on the small desk, a totem of her escape. Sleep that night was deep and dreamless, a complete surrender of the exhausted body and mind. When she woke the next morning, the silence was still there, but it was no longer intimidating. It was peaceful. For the first time in living memory, there was no schedule to adhere to beyond her own, no expectations to meet except those she set for herself. She made a cup of terrible, weak hotel coffee and sat by the window, watching the world go by. The simple act of sitting, of being still without a looming sense of dread, felt like a luxury. A few days later, an email arrived from Daniel Brooks's legal firm. It was formal, concise, and attached was a bank transfer confirmation. The proceeds from the house sale, after fees and a small, unexpected bonus Daniel had insisted upon as compensation for the undue hardship, had been deposited into a new account established solely in her name. The number on the screen was more than she had dared to hope for. It was freedom, quantified. It was a runway. With the financial immediate secured, the next step was the long, arduous process of legally disentangling herself from Mark completely. Mr. Jenkins, now acting as her divorce attorney, was a steady and reassuring guide. The forged deed and the financial records Daniel's investigators had compiled made Mark's position untenable. His own lawyers, once they saw the evidence, advised him to settle quickly and quietly. The divorce proceedings, which Emily had feared would be a protracted war, became a swift administrative severance. Mark, his reputation in tatters and facing potential criminal charges for fraud if Emily chose to press them, had no leverage left. He signed the papers with barely a whimper, agreeing to terms that were overwhelmingly in her favor. There was no fight left in him. The man who once believed he owned the world had been reduced to a cautionary tale in his own social circle. Emily received the final decree in the same hotel room. She read the dry legal language that dissolved the union, and she felt nothing but a mild relief, like the removal of a heavy, ill-fitting coat she'd worn for too long. There was no sadness, no nostalgic pang. The marriage had been over long before the judge made it official. One afternoon, Rachel called again. Emily let it go to voicemail, then listened to the message later. It was full of remorse, pleading for a chance to explain, to rebuild. Emily felt a pang of the old affection, but it was tempered now by a hard-won understanding of her own boundaries. She texted back a simple, "I need more time. I'll reach out when I'm ready." It wasn't forgiveness, but it wasn't a door slammed shut either. It was a door left ajar, with the lock on her side. The hotel room, while safe, was not a home. With her newfound financial stability, Emily began the quiet, deliberate search for a place of her own. She didn't want another showpiece in a manicured suburb. She found a small, sun-drenched apartment in an older, tree-lined neighborhood closer to the city center. It had creaky hardwood floors, a window seat overlooking a communal garden, and a kitchen just big enough for one. She signed the lease with a thrill of pure ownership. This space was hers alone, chosen for its light and its quiet, not for its impressiveness. Furnishing it was a slow, joyful process. She bought a single, comfortable armchair first, placing it by the window. Then a small, solid oak desk for writing. She hung no art that she didn't love, purchased no curtains that weren't exactly the color she wanted. Every object was a conscious choice, a declaration of self. The silence in this apartment was different from the silence in the old house. This silence was companionable, filled with potential. She began to take long walks in the mornings, exploring her new neighborhood. She discovered a tiny independent bookstore, a park with a duck pond, a cafe that made perfect almond croissants. She started reading again, devouring novels she'd put off for years. She even, tentatively, signed up for a weekly pottery class at the local community center, something she'd always wanted to try but Mark had dismissed as messy and pointless. Her first attempts were lopsided and clumsy, but the feel of the cool, wet clay under her fingers was grounding, real. News of Mark's downfall trickled back to her in fragments, though she never sought it out. Lauren, in a fit of familial damage control, had tried to spin a narrative of Emily's instability, but it didn't stick. Too many people had seen the evidence or had heard Mark's own boasts. The professional world that had once lionized him now viewed him with cautious distrust. He left his firm, though whether he was pushed or jumped was a matter of gossip. He sold his flashy car and moved into a modest condo. His Instagram account, once a curated gallery of his aspirational life, went dark. Vanessa, it was said, had moved on almost immediately, finding a new, wealthier prospect without a hint of scandal. Mark became a ghost in the very world he had been so desperate to rule. Emily, by contrast, was slowly coming back to life. The woman who had been folded so small began to unfold. She cut her hair shorter in a style that was easier to manage and felt more like her. She bought clothes and colors she liked, not the neutral, appropriate palette Mark had preferred. The tiredness in her eyes, which had seemed permanent, began to fade, replaced by a thoughtful, observing calm. One evening, about 6 months after she'd closed the door on the old house, she was sitting at her oak desk, a cup of tea steaming beside her, looking over a brochure for a local college. She was considering taking a few courses in graphic design, a long dormant interest. The doorbell rang, an unusual sound in her quiet sanctuary. She opened the door to find Daniel Brooks standing in the hallway. He looked slightly out of place in his impeccably tailored coat against her bohemian apartment building corridor. "Mr. Brooks," she said, surprised. "Daniel, please," he replied with a small smile. "May I come in for a moment? I won't take much of your time." She ushered him in. He took in the small apartment with a glance that was appreciative, not assessing. "It suits you," he said simply. "Thank you," she replied, gesturing to the armchair. "Can I get you some tea?" "No, thank you. This isn't a social call, entirely. I wanted to deliver this to you in person." He handed her a sealed manila envelope. Emily opened it. Inside were more documents, but these were final. They were confirmation that all legal matters were conclusively closed. Mark had satisfied the final financial settlements. The investigation into the fraud had been concluded with a settlement that included a significant additional payment to Emily and a binding non-disclosure agreement that protected her but also spared Mark a public prosecution on the condition he sought financial counseling and committed no further offenses. It was a clean, clinical end. "It's over," Daniel said. "Truly over. He can't touch you, financially or otherwise, ever again." Emily felt the last invisible thread snap. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You gave me my life back." Daniel shook his head. "I just held up a mirror to his actions. You were the one who had the courage to look. I came here for another reason, too." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "My firm has a small philanthropy wing. We fund initiatives that support women rebuilding their lives after situations not unlike yours. We're starting a new program that provides not just financial grants, but mentoring, career guidance. I've seen your strength and your clarity. I wondered if you might consider coming to work with us, not as a client, as a consultant. Your perspective would be invaluable." Emily was stunned. She looked around her small, self-built apartment, then back at Daniel. The offer was a bridge from her past directly into a future where her pain could have purpose. I don't have any formal qualifications for that," she said. "You have the only qualification that matters. You understand the landscape. You've navigated it. Think about it. No pressure." He stood to leave, handing her his card with a personal number written on the back. "The offer stands whenever you're ready." After he left, Emily stood in the middle of her quiet living room, the envelope in one hand, his card in the other. The setting sun streamed through the window, painting the walls in gold and orange. For so long, her story had been defined by someone else's narrative: the overlooked wife, the discarded chapter, the victim. But as she looked around at the life she was painstakingly creating, she saw a different story. It was a story of quiet resilience, of a courage that wasn't loud, but was unbreakable. It was the story of a woman who had been left with nothing and used that nothing as the foundation for something truly her own. She placed Daniel's card on her desk next to the college brochure. She didn't have to choose today. The freedom to choose was the greatest gift of all. She walked to the window and watched the dusk settle over the garden below. The lights in the other apartments began to twinkle on, each one a separate world, a separate story. Hers was no longer a story about Mark or a house or a betrayal. It was a story about a woman named Emily, who was finally, peacefully, and completely home.